we rush into marriage before we're properly equipped.
Absolutely.
With the sort of tools that could allow us to thrive. It takes humility to be able to say, I love this person, but I'm not ready for a commitment like marriage yet. Now, it doesn't mean you need 19 years until you get ready, but it could mean that maybe you need some pre-marriage counseling, or maybe you need to talk to a relationship coach, or maybe you really need to ask yourself tough questions, because I didn't have a toolkit for managing conflict. I didn't have a toolkit for, even defining what I wanted, let alone helping create a supportive environment for what she wanted. And then you find yourself at odds, and now you're two completely different people in a lot of ways, heading in two completely different paths, and neither of you is a bad person, right? It's just, wow, like here we are, and now what are we going to do? And it's a really painful thing.
Welcome back to the Flourish podcast. My name is Shae and...
Hey, my name is Abe Brown. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, today we are going to be talking about relationships. So, did you want to start out with that?
Yeah, I love the conversation about relationships, not just because it's obviously a really important topic, just generally speaking, but because relationships are so critical when it comes to mental health. And so, in Flourishing, we're always spending a lot of time on mental health and the power of a relationship to either build or destroy your mental health is well documented. So why don't we start with, broadly speaking, what are you seeing out there, broadly speaking, social scientist Shae, when it comes to relationships?
Yeah, so I think just in general, we talked about previously how relationships are everything in life, and they definitely improve our mental health, but I definitely think that there's a lack of it, and isolation is on the rise even after COVID. And it's kind of like, we know we talk about this all the time, but the internet has kind of made us live this virtual life. So,
yeah, it's really interesting because I was thinking about it the other day when I was in school, how amazingly connected you felt. I was in a very multiracial school, grew up just outside of Toronto, and we didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about division or thinking about the fact that people were different from us. It was just people, either you were a jerk and nobody liked you, or you're a pretty good guy and everybody thought very highly of you. And then you think where we are at right now, and even something as simple as dating. Imagine being a high school kid who goes through COVID and how that really messed up even people's ability to have normal relationships, right? And so I think we're struggling today as sort of a culture and a society. And I think that some of that is just self-caused, but no one's to blame. It's just, we have to think a lot about how do we build healthy relationships, right? Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of this goes back to what sort of templates or blueprints or patterns did many of us have for relationships. So maybe that's where we can start, because you can't really do something that great if it's never been modeled for you or you've never been taught. I know for myself, I didn't have a ton of great relationship patterns, so I had to sort of figure it out on the back of a napkin, and and that didn't necessarily go so well. So how about you?
Yeah, so I think growing up, I had a family of parents who are still together today, and no family is perfect, but I kind of grew up with the mentality of watching my parents go through tough things, but they always seemed to just work hard and work it out. And that was my role models growing up. And so I even remember as a kid, a lot of my friends would tell me how they never wanted to get married because they grew up in broken homes or whatnot. And I never really understood that, because that's not what I grew up with. So I was very much why? Well, that doesn't make sense to me. Of course, I just saw my parents work it out. So that's just what you do. But I was also very naive to the amount of work that it takes and what you're looking for and all of that. And then in terms of friendships, I think I always had a good couple of friends growing up. I didn't always have a bunch of friends, but I think school was great for that. And we didn't really do social media as much when I was in school. So it wasn't as virtual as it is today. I don't even know if I could relate to that completely, but I can imagine it's a lot more difficult today. So
yeah, I think it is. And you have to really think about sort of the long-term implications of this. I mean, on the one hand, it's so cool, right, to be able to hop on FaceTime with somebody who's literally on the other side of the planet, or a Facebook Messenger call or whatever, right? I have a beautiful friend in Australia that we connect with quite a bit, and clients there. And, you just use WhatsApp, and it's so simple and it's so easy. But you also think, like, if that's the extent of your relationships, how tough it must be. Mm-hmm. But you talked about having a bit of a blueprint from your parents and noticing that they worked it out.
Yep.
I think in relationships today, it's very, very hard, right?
Yep.
Because a lot of people aren't seeing that.
Yep.
So what were some of the things you learned just, kind of by, I guess, osmosis, growing up with your folks and your family? What did you learn about healthy relationships?
Yeah. So I noticed that, I think, I guess what I see now is that if there's an indifference, or if there's a frustration, people don't deal with it, or they're like, I don't want to deal with this. So they just move forward, but not knowing there's going to be an issue in every relationship. So it'll just be a continuous pattern. So I did see how, there were hard moments, there were hard seasons. There's financial issues in every family and things like that I just watched them overcome, and together, and they worked as a team. And, I think that really stood out to me, because we're not supposed to be competing. If we're in a relationship, truly, it's like, right, to become one, we're supposed to be a team. So
that's huge, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like the fact that it's not as though things are perfect, right? I mean, the reality is that every family has its dysfunction, right? Mm-hmm. But if the default sort of response, if you and I are in a friendship or a relationship, and I notice something about you that I don't like, or a way that you interact with me that I don't like, then I just run out. Well, there's no ever opportunity for anything sort of substantial or sustainable to be built, right? Yeah. Now, we all have to have our lines, like, obviously we don't want to be tolerating abuse or massive levels of toxicity. Yeah. But I think we also need a higher level of tolerance than we see often today, and I think partially, if we're sort of told that everyone around us is supposed to create a safe space for us, it can give us, in some senses, a lack of resilience, mm-hmm. Because sometimes it takes a little bit of personal growth to weather the storm of, say, conflict or differences of opinion, until we can both land on something that works for both of us, right?
Yep. Yep. And so how about you? I know a bit of your story growing up, but I know it was quite different than mine. And so what are some things that you learned, and the kind of role models, and how that shaped you to today?
Yeah, it's a great question, because we can always learn from our past. And while we're going through it, we don't always sort of know that we're learning patterns that will carry into our relationships going forward. Like, how is a 4 or 5 year old or 8-year-old supposed to sort of know that? And so I think just watching, how my mother was treated by men, put a lot of ideas in my mind about relationships. And it's interesting, because for some men, I guess that would make them more abusive and more, mean. I think for me, it almost produced the opposite, And so on the one hand, I struggled to properly show respect to other people, because I'd never seen that modeled. On the other hand, in some ways, I was almost passive to the point where I wouldn't speak my mind. And because I thought, well, if I do, then they're going to interpret this as some kind of abuse or some kind of disrespect. Like, it was just sort of this weird dynamic. It's almost like, in some ways, I relate it to having the fear of success and the fear of failure at the same time. So on the one hand, I didn't know, I sometimes said and did things disrespectfully because I hadn't seen respect modeled. On the other hand, in a lot of ways, I didn't have a voice to really express, well, but here's what I actually need for us to be able to thrive, because I didn't want to come across as though I was disrespectful. So it's kind of this weird psychology that I developed. And I think it was only when I went through my first marriage and I had a breakdown. I mean, we were together for 10 years, and I got nothing bad to say about her. She's a lovely person, and I'm so grateful that we had our time together. But, it devastated me when the marriage came to an end. Like, it was, I mean, if anyone is listening to this and you've been through it, like, it's not like, oh, that's an easy thing, whatever, you just toss it off. Like, it took me years to recover from that. And the recovery was both about my own awareness of the blueprints that were faulty in my life and how I needed to change it. But of course, also, like, we had kids and we had homes together, and the ripple effect, the financial effect, all of those things, it takes you years to recover from. So listening to you talk about your parents, I mean, what a blessing, because, it's sort of like this idea of, well, choose your hard. Like, your life is going to be hard, right? There's going to be the hard ship of keeping a marriage together over 30, 40, 50 years, right? There's going to be hardship there.
Yep.
But then the other hard is, well, we can't make it work anymore. Yep. And then we start all over again. Well, that in some ways is even more hard. And I'm not judging anybody because I've been through it. So how could I judge you? Right. But I just think that sometimes we rush into marriage before we're properly equipped.
Absolutely.
With the sort of tools that could allow us to thrive. It takes humility to be able to say, I love this person, but I'm not ready for a commitment like marriage yet. Now, it doesn't mean you need 19 years until you get ready, but it could mean that maybe you need some pre-marriage counseling, or maybe you need to talk to a relationship coach, or maybe you really need to ask yourself tough questions, because I didn't have a toolkit for managing conflict. I didn't have a toolkit for, even defining what I wanted, let alone helping create a supportive environment for what she wanted. And then you find yourself at odds, and now you're two completely different people in a lot of ways, heading in two completely different paths, and neither of you is a bad person, right? It's just, wow, like, here we are, and now what are we going to do? And it's a really painful thing.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, I don't wish divorce upon anyone, because I myself have walked through it as well. And, I think I would say from my experience, like you said, not rushing into it. So I think in my generation, maybe not just my generation, but we feel the pressure of getting to that next level of wanting to get married and starting a family. We're looking at our time clock as women. Like, that's just a logical thing that we do. And it's a real thing. Yeah, so let's not just put that under the rug. And so we feel the pressure. But I also think there's, for myself, I was single most of my 20s. I wasn't really in the dating pool. I was focusing on growth in some aspects, but I also wasn't being honest with myself in a lot of other aspects. Okay. So I was kind of just waiting for someone. And what I've learned now in my 30s, now that I'm single, is to wait well, actually do the work, the inner work that I need to do. So learning communication skills,
right. Yes.
Learning how to deal with conflict. Right. You don't need to be dating. I've been on one date in 2.5 years. So you don't necessarily need to be dating to learn these things. You can learn these things in your relationships with your family. Yep. You can learn these things with your employer. Sure. You know what I mean? You're always in relationships with other people. And I heard someone say, how you treat the people that are closest to you. So for me, I know my parents are super close to me, people I work with, then that's how I'm going to treat my future spouse. Sure. And so if you want to take a look at, my respect factor and things like that, I have to really look at the relationships that are in my life. And I think I rushed into that, and I wasn't looking at the values. Do our values match? Are we going to raise our kids the same way? Do we have the same perspective on our own faith walk? Or does, I don't know if you're a Christian, but I don't know, I'm a Christian, but it's just that's not going to work long term. Right. I know, it's we had this attraction, and it's that's just not sustainable. And so I've been really humbled over the last few years, to be honest. Yeah. And you can, look at someone else and point out everything that's wrong with them all day long. But at the end of the day, I realized that I have to look at myself in the mirror, and I have to look at where I was making mistakes. And I just because I can't change another person. So I realized that person has free will, just like me. They can make their own decisions. Absolutely. I can't control them. Yeah. All I can really do is better myself. So
no, that's a lot of wisdom, right? And it's painful, right? It's painful. It's especially, I know you have a beautiful son. I had 2 kids at the time. And if it's just you and another person, it's still painful, but it's just different, right? And it's different because you recognize, okay, I'll suffer because of my actions, but that's fine because I'm making that choice. Whereas when you have a child, it's like, oh my goodness, there will be a ripple effect of that. But you know what? I'll tell you this, like, I guess, in my journey, like I shared, it took me a couple of years just to recover. There was the pain, there was the finances, there was all of the shared friends and shared world we had created. We were together for 10 years. Like, it's not like we were together for 5 minutes. And, but in the ashes of that, as I started to rebuild, I'm normal. So anyone around me, I'm sort of both introvert and extrovert. So I have no problem meeting people and making friends. And so I made lots of friends, men and women. And I started to connect with somebody, this beautiful woman that I'm married to now. And, what was really interesting was because of the pain of the first marriage, and similar to you, in my first marriage, I was 22 years old. My wife was 18. I was the pastor of a church in a small town. And one day the elders, the board members came up to me and they said, you're the pastor of the church now. You need to get married. And 6 months later, I was married. And, we dated for 3 months. We were engaged for 3 months. And that was it. And 10 years later, our marriage ended. And again, no blame. It's just, there was not a foundation laid in this marriage that I'm in today. And this will be my last, right? Even if it ended for some crazy reason, I would not do the marriage thing again, but it's not going to end. And we spent 3.5 years dating and talking and having conversations and taking long walks together. I remember our first 10 dates literally was like sitting in a coffee shop or a Boston Pizza, and we would literally have like 3-hour conversations. I told her everything about me in the first like 5 or 10 dates, because I did not want her later to find out something nasty about my past from some other source than me. In other words, I said I wanted to be with somebody who knew me at my worst and give her the choice as to, now that I know this about you, am I going to proceed, rather than 5 years into a marriage, she hears about it from somebody else or what have you. And I think that level of transparency meant that she's never tried to change me. My wife has never, come into me and said, you're this, you need to change your hair, or you need to lose some weight, or you need to gain some weight, or you need to be this or be that. She's always expressed her feelings about what she appreciates or maybe not if I'm hurting her, but she absolutely knows the worst about me. And that level of acceptance has given me a safe place. I wasn't looking for a pass, but you can't, if somebody who's with you can't live with you in your worst moment and in your best moment, then they're probably not the right person for you. And I feel like today, we are a lot more focused on, do I have a profile pic that makes somebody swipe right or left, rather than let's have a heart-to-heart connection. And maybe that will become romantic. But if nothing else, I've found a friend. That's the way I looked at it. I thought and I'm not just saying that because it sounds cool. Like literally, I thought we may never kiss, we may never make a child together, we may never do any of that. But if I'm not honest with her, then I can't even be a friend with her, right? Because we've all had that disappointment that comes when you find out that somebody hasn't been honest with you, and it's a lot harder to recover from that. Then I'm going to be upfront with you, Shae or Joe or Tom or Susie or whoever, about here's who I am. Now, that is a big risk. And so I wouldn't recommend that if you are just out there in a bar on a Friday night and you look across the bar and she looks sexy and then you're like, I got to tell her everything. That's probably the worst thing you can do, right? But our context was like our first date wasn't in a bar. It wasn't like on the Vegas Strip. It wasn't, on a beach in Mexico after 19 mojitos. It was, I messaged her and we met through some friends and hey, could we meet for coffee? I was sober. There was daylight. It was a very public place. And we just had a conversation. And I just think that if we could give ourselves permission to have more vulnerable conversations without like manipulation or without like trying to control, but just, this is who I am. And I just want to be your friend. And if that leads to something, great. But if not, that's okay, because we can still be friends. And I think, it's kind of scary, but to me, I don't know any other strategy.